Alrighty, hello. Today I am joined by Squishei of my guild and of Wowhead and of other various sources. You may know him for his Immersius guide, critically acclaimed. Uh, and we're going to talk about the ins and outs of Tyrannical. The point of this video is basically that there is a very blatant distinction between Fortified and Tyrannical, not only just this season, but seasons past. I would say that right now, this is probably the biggest discrepancy we've seen between Fortified and Tyrannical since the final Legion season. Would you agree?
I think so. We haven't seen the full push week for Fortified yet, so I'm kind of curious how that's going to go. But after coming off this really, really good Tyrannical week, some people did pretty high keys considering the Corruption Vendor finally came out.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of IO to be gained via the Corruption Vendor, but even still, you notice that there is a large distinction between Tyrannical and Fortified. Because, like, I think I would almost go as far to say is, like, the worst Fortified week is probably easier than the best Tyrannical week, which the best Tyrannical week is what we just had. It was that skittish, bursting one. What would even be the worst Fortified week? It'd probably have to be
one of the necrotic ones?
There's no necrotic fortified. Necrotic fortified is not a.
Then probably a grievous one for high keys, I'd assume.
So maybe this week the bolstering grievous week.
I think that definitely slows you down a lot. I don't know if I'd agree that Tyrannical is easier. It's just like it's way easier to time fortified keys than Tyrannical ones because of how long things take.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely would agree with that. Okay, so I guess we can start off. Basically, we're going to talk about the tier 1 affix row, which is Tyrannical and Fortified. We're going to have some the reasons for the problem, like what the problems really are, some solutions that we've come up with. Also want to just like get some conversation, get a lot of feedback on what other people think about this as well. But realistically, this is just going to be talking about how Tyrannical and Fortified currently fare in the state of the game. Alright, so I guess we can talk about the reasoning for Tyrannical and Fortified. And I think that you were the one who made me think about this the most. And it's to make the weeks feel vastly different in differing ways. Do you want to explain how they do that?
Yeah, so obviously 1 week, I mean, you have your tank who is literally getting pooped on by trash, where there's the other week, trash is just kind of like you blow through it, it's a nice chill, then you get to the bosses, and it kind of feels like a raid boss. Sometimes one that takes a very, very long time. And if their goal is to make the weeks feel different, I think they accomplished that goal, but it doesn't make it feel any better to have bosses take 5+ minutes.
I think that I would agree that they definitely feel different. I guess the question is, did they accomplish their goal? So basically, the goal of Fortified is to make the trash significantly harder in one way or another, in like limiting how many trash mobs you can pull at a time. Whereas for Tyrannical, it's to make the bosses feel, like Squishy said, more like a raid boss style encounter. But I don't feel like Fortified really limits your pull size in the exact same way. Whereas Tyrannical, there is a very distinct amount of time that is to be lost by having to play that full boss with, what is it, 40% increased HP?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, that's a very tangible distinction, whereas Fort, you can just, like, your limiting factor is not normally the damage increase of Fortified mobs' health, or like, the damage increase from the Fortified mobs, or the health from the Fortified mobs. Most of the time, it's the mobs themselves, whether it be via kicks or stops or whatever, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is like damage increased by 40%, but there's so many ways to mitigate that damage. Like trash mechanics are, some of them are lethal, but that mostly comes in the melee swings or specific things that you need to kick, and you can just kite, or you have ways to prevent those abilities. And that's not true on bosses. You're forced to take the increased health. You're forced to take the increased damage just because it's completely unavoidable. You can't skip hard mobs. You can't, pull things together and then kite it all at once just to kind of make up some of that time. But so it just seems very imbalanced, considering Fortified is also only 20% health compared to bosses.
Yeah. I would also... Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the problems. So now that we've like laid out like what Tyrannical and Fortified are supposed to be doing in the state of the dungeon, like how they're supposed to be changing, like whether you're pulling the dungeon a certain way or whether you're pulling bosses a certain way, we're going to talk about some of the problems that occur because of the system and how it's been created. So we already talked about, like, most of the time, like, your pull is determined based on the mobs. but it's very hard to make Tyrannical, like, you're not really going to pull differently on Tyrannical even still. I guess the next thing would be Tyrannical and Fortified are probably the most polarizing set of affixes. Like, they change the most in a week to week scenario in terms of like your ability to be able to time a key, just due to the sheer length of boss fights. And this is definitely an upper end problem, I would say. This part specifically is an upper end problem. Maybe Necrotic is harder than Tyrannical versus Fortified are, but like the distinction between those two affixes is like pretty significant. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just Tyrannical makes timing the key much harder.
Yes.
It doesn't actually make the key much harder. Sometimes, most of the time, but it actually just makes timing the key much harder. Versus, Fortified week like this week, like Grievous and Bolstering, that actually makes the key much harder. But you can time the key just because bosses don't take 6 minutes.
Oh yeah, dude. Bolstering slows down your pulls so much. So think about dungeons that are normally pretty quick pace. Talazar is like a really good example. Waycrest Manor. Like, you pull a bunch of trash into bosses in Waycrest Manor. Talazar, they're like 15 Sarad snaps that a lot of groups do. On Bolstering, very infrequently do you do stuff like that. But the Bolstering Grievous week is a better week than the best Tyrannical week. It's better than a bursting skittish Tyran. That distinction feels a little weird to me.
Yeah. I mean, it almost feels like when you add Tyrannical to a dungeon, they should also like increase the timer by a small amount.
I wouldn't hate that.
That seems a little weird, but if that's their solution, they like screwing with timers occasionally. Maybe just like increase the timer by 2 minutes on a Tyrannical key. Band-Aid, but that might not be the worst thing.
It would definitely be a band-aid for like the current like that would definitely be a band-aid solution, I would say. But it would definitely alleviate the problem of it being just strictly harder to time the key. Okay, so like I guess we can give some examples. So think Yasma, or think Dread Captain Lockwood. For Yasma specifically, you get a bunch of extra soul rins, and like you have to kill those ads. So a 40%, like a boss that has 40% more health than an equivalent fortified level is going to equate to longer than a 40% gain on the boss's health for Yasma, because you're going to spawn significantly more soul rend ads. Or in the case of Dread Captain Lockwood, you're going to get more withdraw casts, meaning that you're going to have to just like fight more intermissions.
It also just depends on how much health the bosses have.
Yes.
Because bosses don't all have the same health. Something like King Dazar has his normal health plus, his Raptors, which adds up to like 1.5 times regular boss, or King Mechagon, which has like almost 2 times the health of a regular mythic boss. And it's just like, okay.
Something I didn't think of too is that there's a lot of shit that just scales with Fortified or Tyrannical that is very weird. Like a good example of this is the Galvast pillars. Those scale with Fortified, but not Tyrannical. The Hoodoo Hexers on Avatar of Sethrilus scale with Fortified, but the boss's health of Avatar of Sethrilus that you have to heal up scales with Tyrannical, and you're just like...
That one's actually not true. Okay. The boss's health doesn't scale with either. The pulse damage, which is like some random NPC, scales with Tyrannical.
Okay.
It is the weirdest
shit. The Hoodoo Hexers, are the Hexers that you have to kill, scale with Fortified, but the pulse damage scales with Tyrannical, not even the boss health.
Yeah. And then you have Adaris and Aspix, one of which scales with Tyrannical, and the other one doesn't, and it's like, what is going on, Blizzard?
Yeah, so it's just like, it's not uniform in terms of like what scales with what scales with Tyrannical, but the boss HP is normally what is the like ultimately impacting factor, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, in that note, if they just separated Tyrannical into more health but more time, and Fortified into just more damage, I don't know. That's just a weird thing too, but that's almost what it's turning into at this point.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, the mob health for Fort does not matter. Like, you do not care.
Right. It's all the damage. And most of the things that are scaling with Fort on bosses, they don't have health, right? Like, the Magneto Arm and King Mechagon doesn't have health, it's just 40% more damage. Or
I hate that, pillars. Yeah, the Magneto Orb is brutal on Fortified.
Yeah. So it's just like, is it better to just have Tyrannical and Fortified just be one health, one damage, and you just kind of alternate between like, you pump damage, you take no damage, but you just go full pump, versus like, I need to play a little defensively, but things die super quick.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a better distinction than the current one. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so something that I have written down is it becomes a major problem in an infinitely scaling system where it probably does not matter for lower levels. I think that so basically once you start reaching the 20 to 21 key level range where the exponential scaling starts to get really ramped up, then you start noticing like major problems with Tyrannical and Fortified. I think we would agree that Tyrannical is easier to time keys at lower levels because you get punished less frequently on trash, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think so because I mean, trash takes up the majority of your instance. You spend the
Yes.
majority of your time on trash. It's just how long Tyrannical takes.
Yeah. In conjunction with that, I think that we both agree that Tyrannical and Fortified aren't necessarily like fun designs. I've described them as like lazily designed, but like I don't even know if I necessarily believe that they're lazily designed, but they like in terms of like they're trying to get you to fight bosses for longer and they're trying to get you to fight trash for longer, but it really doesn't achieve that goal and it just ends up making the dungeon feel bad or less bad. And there's like it's just based on those two affixes. Like obviously the dungeons feel not great or like they feel good based on a large amount of differentiating factors, but Tyrannical and Fortified just by themselves make the dungeons feel like either like bad or less bad. And then it's on a week to week basis. I think part of the problem too is that they alternate every other week. So one week you have Fort, and then the next you have Tyrannical. I think that is like a major dilemma too, because so say with what we currently have in the game, there's like a pseudo push week phenomenon where you'll play. I don't know. I guess this season's like half the weeks in a season, or whatever. But half of those weeks are all Fortified.
Yeah,
And I think that since they alternate with like this infinitely scaling system, it's really hard to make it where it feels okay and just like interacts with the dungeon in a like succinct way.
yeah, and I'm not sure what exactly. I know we're gonna get to solutions, but what exactly they can do about that? It's like,
Yes.
I thought of, they can add a third one, and that just makes like a good one, a bad one, and like an okay one, and that's not really great either. But a two rotating affix. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they could do about that. I really don't.
I think the two rotating affix, the more that I really think about it, is maybe just like one of the core problems with the whole entire thing, right? Is that
Yeah.
is that it's present so often. So think about other like not sick affixes. Like old quaking was really bad, or necrotic
Yep.
is also notoriously terrible. You could just elect to not really go that ham. Like you don't
Sure.
have to do. You could just do like a weekly key, right? But there are a lot
Yeah.
of people who want to do Mythic Plus as their primary source of in-game content, and if let's say half of the weeks are blocked off because you don't really want to play on those weeks, I think that's where you start like getting into the point where there's going to be a major problem. I also didn't write this down, but I guess we can talk about the fact that raging is just not present on Tyrannical. Like raging and necrotic are just they're not present on Fortified at all. They're only present on Tyrannical, is what I meant to say.
I mean
And
that
it's
was
like they would
that's an
feel
intentional
bad.
change.
Yeah, I
That's
know
a,
that it's an intentional change, but should it be like that?
I mean, otherwise you're getting raging for it, and raging is its own discussion topic. But I
Yes.
mean, briefly to cover it, raging plus for it is like not really exponential. They multiply off each other and create horrible situations that in Legion that they removed because of the feedback that they got. I think.
Yeah. Raging in of itself is pretty rough, but like even still, so Raging Fort doesn't exist. Necrotic Fort doesn't exist for very similar reasons that uh, Raging doesn't with that affix. But even still, it's like so you're shoehorning like you're almost doubling down on this. It's like oh half the tyrannical weeks are Raging, the other half are Necrotic, and then you have like one
Yep.
skittish bursting week, which is not horrible. I don't know, man. Like it's really stacked against Tyrannical in that sense too.
I mean, it's why I think a lot of people have been wanting a fresh affix rework for a while, considering raging doesn't pair well with fortified, so it's being stuck on the tyrannical week, like you said, and okay, so that limits the amount of tyrannical weeks. Like there's
I
one good tyrannical week, and a couple decent fortified ones. Like almost all the fortified ones are grievous. I think there's only one non-grievous fort, something like that.
No, you mean bursting. I think there's like one
Oh, okay,
non-bursting
okay, yeah.
fort week. Most of it's like there's a lot of bursting fort weeks from what I remember. It's like bursting or grievous, I think, is like most of them. But like even still, okay. So why in season 1 was Tyrannical the premier push week affix over Fortified? Do you think?
I think that one is because of character power.
Okay.
And I
Tank
I wanted to think that
survivability,
tanks,
or
yeah, that tanks couldn't survive the increased damage of Fortified. I didn't play a lot back then, so you might know better than me, but my initial impression is that healer and tank power were not as strong to be able to deal with the increased damage. So overall the keys were lowered significantly,
sure,
but you couldn't deal with Fortified's increased damage, so you just dealt with Tyrannical, and even though bosses took a long time, you dealt with it because we said that those are easier to deal with in general.
I think that healer power one is actually a very important note. Healers this expansion, like tanks too to a lesser degree, but I feel like healer power this expansion has been insane. So like if you take a bursting 6 stack from season 1 felt almost impossible to heal, whereas healers now can just like slam through a 15 stack and oh dude, if a Resto Druid has Ever Rising Tide on, man, they can do a 20 stack and probably be okay.
Yeah, and like I mean, I remember season 2. We were like, all right, Galv, like Temple of Cephalus, 20, 22. All right, let's look at Galv. Hey, healer, can you heal this? Like, do you think we're gonna be okay, or should we lower this and try to get something else? Because Galv was the big stop in Temple back then. But now it's like
Avatar pulse damage, pretty rough. But yeah, that's it. That's definitely the rough one. But again, it's like there's been so much that's changed over the expansion, and it's like Tyrannical and Fortified. Now we're literally at a point where Fortified is just as bad as it was at the end of Legion, where they rebalanced Tyrannical and Fortified coming into BFA even to make sure that this did not happen again. Oh, it's happened again. Don't worry, we're back there.
Yeah, I think there's just like this slow, very slow climb at the beginning because Fortified couldn't be done and Tyrannical could be. But then once you get that power in, Fortified just takes off, and you have this massive climb right now. And I think it's just all due to character power between like damage, like outgoing damage, healer power, and tank power. Because as long as you can tank the Fortified mobs, you can pull as much as you want realistically. But you know, single target damage is capped.
Versatile tanks, man.
Yeah.
Well, part of the problem too is that you can't pull a lot of trash into bosses for a lot of bosses. Like there's some bosses that it's pretty easy to pull trash into, but man, there are a lot of bosses that pulling trash into it is fairly deadly. So you'd rather fight the trash on its own and then you fight the boss by itself. I think that's also probably a piece of the puzzle that's missing.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Next, also on the list is one-shots, which are always fantastic. So in all fairness, they've been pretty decent about counterbalancing one-shots, but there's still a large amount of one-shots that exist in the game. Azurite Powder Shot will one-shot you at a 19 to a 20 on Tyrannical versus a 21 to a 22 on Fortified. So yeah. I would say, what would be your cutoff range for like a more casual Mythic Plus player? Like, would you say it's like I think like 18 and 19 is like my casual hardcore Mythic Plus gamer.
If there is counterplay, now this I don't think Azurite Powder Shot, the way they've done it or the way we do it, is the intended way. But since there's counterplay, I'm okay with it going to like 25, 26.
Okay.
I think as long as there's counterplay, I think it's generally okay for them to one-shot you if you screw it up. To an extent, like Upheaval, the majority of classes can do it, but some can't. That's like not
pretty rough.
Great.
I don't like that one.
It's not great, but if there was like some way, some fight mechanic that allowed you to dodge that one shot if you did a certain thing, or just like you got a simple speed boost, like you could speed pot or something, I don't know. I think that'd be a lot better. But to answer your question, I'd say like 20.
Yeah, 15, where should that cutoff be?
Yeah, 15 should be like where people go, and then like you go a little higher. 20. I think you should be able to like survive at 20. So like 21. Like I like the multiples of 5.
Yeah, that's where like, because I got one shot by a Deadeye in a 26. I don't really expect 26 to be balanced the same way that I feel like oh shit, this ability one-shots you in a 19. Like, come on, bro. Like,
Yeah.
that starts overlapping with like the hardcore casual Mythic Plus player. Like your 2,500 IO players who are still very good compared to a large portion of the player base, but like, dude, getting one shot at, especially if you don't know what a very meta strategy will be for like upheaval or Azurite Powder Shot, I guess are best examples. Yeah, that's always pretty rough. They have aggressively tuned this expansion, to be fair, so it's a little bit lesser to a degree, but like
it's no Hersha.
Exactly. There's no Hersha
or God King Skovald.
This boss has sucked. But even still, like Tyrannical polarizes it to the fact where it starts overlapping with these more laid back players.
Yeah. And I don't even think those are the biggest offenders. I think my biggest offender for one shots is Eudora's shot.
The double shot on Eudora is really bad.
I think that one is actually the worst one. It's funny because I'm pretty sure the Dungeon Journal for that says it attacks its primary threat target.
Really? Is it supposed to hit your primary? That makes so much more sense.
Right now.
So that makes so much more sense, and the reason for that is because it's mitigated by armor. So if it hit the tank every single time, tanks don't take any damage from Eudora's shot, by the way. That's actually just like a trivial amount of damage for them. But then whenever it starts blasting DPS, you're like, oh god, I'm dying, help. Please safeguard me, bro.
No, I'm wrong. It's a random target.
It would make more sense if it was primary, to be fair.
Something was, and I don't remember what it was, but it's... Yeah, that one's weird because, like, I mean, range has some counterplay to, like, lining the shot, but what do melee do? Like...
Get intervened by their Prot Warrior friend, man.
And it's like little counterplay. It's based on armor, which is something that they've kind of stopped doing for a while instead of, magic damage. And yeah, that one's rough.
Yeah. So I think that's all of like the problems that Tyrannical versus Fortified has at this point. I think it's ever complex. I think there is a lot of problems with the system that are more than even we just went over. But
do you want to bring up Vikgoth real quick? It's your favorite fight, I know, on Tyrannical.
The bosses are just bad, man. You remember whenever Okay, I love Vikgoth. They fixed the spotter being able to kill the artillery down the tentacle. They didn't add any timer to the dungeon, by the way. And then it's like, oh my god, they didn't nerf this fight. They removed the ability to be able to spotter down that dungeon is so bad. I cannot wait for that dungeon to be gone. Anyways, that's by far my least favorite dungeon.
I know. I've heard your Vikgoth 8-minute rants multiple times. You have time.
Anyhow. Alright, so we got solutions. Where do you want to start with solutions? I guess you can lead us off with this one.
So I think we've talked about possible solutions, because I think, like, a bunch of people are like, remove it.
Yes,
but I
remove
feel
it.
like there is something to be said about the difference. Like, it does what I think Blizzard wants to do, which is make a change between weeks. The question is, how intrusive is it, and can we find a solution that, fixes the problem while also doesn't make Tyrannical feel like garbage? And the funny thing is, up until like this point when we've talked, I don't know that we have, because it seems really hard to. One of these two will always be better, no matter what expansion we've been in. One of these has always been better than the other.
And okay, so I never really had a problem with one of the two being better per se. The real issue is that they alternate on a week-to-week basis. So like you think about the other affix rows, the difference between Necrotic and something like Volcanic is so high.
Yep.
But Necrotic is active for 2 weeks out of the season. Volcanic is active for 2 weeks out of the season. So it's not as big of a deal, where Tyrannical is active 6 weeks out of the season and Fortified is active the other 6.
That's true.
I think that is like a major part of the dilemma, is that because it alternates on a week-to-week rotation, you run into ever-present problems with one or the other. And I don't know if there will be a great way to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, I briefly mentioned that earlier. I thought it was possible that, like, maybe they just need to create another subset of affixes, like throw teaming in there, throw like teaming for bigger pack sizes. Throw reaping in there, so you have like a set of 4 fixes that affect, pack size kind of thing, or like quality of packs or something. I don't know. It's really hard to tell, but
this is what we were talking about. Help? I don't know, but we were talking about like some solutions, and you came up with, what was it? Was it Destiny where they have the second boss copycat shit?
No, it's PoE.
Okay, it's PoE. One of the some of the fixes or whatever they are called in PoE. Like you'll have like a copy of a boss. I think the point that we're trying to make is make Tyrannical and Fort interact with the dungeon beyond just health and damage. I don't think that those are the premier solutions. Like Squishei was like alluding to, you could replace Fortified with something like teaming or reaping. That would make the dungeons more trash focused. I think that teaming should also not increase your count required. I think it should just increase the pack size, but that's neither here nor there.
I agree with you.
Yeah, it's neither here nor there. But like, I don't really have a great solution for Tyrannical. It would be some boss-focused equivalent. I don't really have a great example, but that's just like, it should interact with the dungeon beyond health and damage, I think was the point.
I mean, it would probably take too much dev time. Like if on Tyrannical weeks, like Overseer Korgus had a third buff that he could put up that interacted the dungeon in a different way. Dude, I don't know. Like one's a knockback, one's damage. The third one could be like,
if you're fundamentally changing the bosses, I think that would be so problematic because the barrier to entry in Mythic Plus is by far the knowledge of how to do the dungeon. So I think adding more things that you have to learn would be problematic in a completely different way. I don't think there's a great solution for Fortified and Tyrannical beyond, like, to make the dungeons scale beyond health and damage, because they alternate every other week.
Yeah, I mean, we brought up, or I brought up earlier that like they could just make Tyrannical health only and Fortified damage output only. So like 1 week you play defensively, 1 week you play offensively.
Would that even change anything? I don't think they change anything.
No, I don't think that would change anything other than like, you know what you're getting into. I mean, the other thing that we talked about is just like stick a band-aid on it, because if there's no other solution, like a band-aid is better than nothing of just adding an increased timer for Tyrannical week.
Yeah, because I would say like you said, a huge portion of Tyrannical's issue is the fact that it just makes dungeons very challenging to time.
Yeah. And
because
as
you're
a
pulling the same size, like you're not pulling any bigger or smaller on Fort or Tyrannical.
Yeah, I mean on Tyrannical, like as a tank, it's just kind of like Trash is just chill. Like,
yeah,
you're used to Trash kind of owning you and doing lots of damage, whereas here you're just kind of like, okay, like this is cool, and you get to bosses and it's like, well, I'm in for like a 6-minute fight here, but it's chill.
Do you think tanks are too powerful?
I think the scaling has been wild this expansion. From like all tanks dying to be the expansion to tanks are basically at the spot where they didn't want them to be last expansion. So
I think tank players feel better whenever their tanks are overpowered, though, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, tanks want to be self-sufficient, but there has to be some leeway for healer gameplay. But considering tanks and healers scale throughout the entire expansion, you now have like OP healers, OP tanks. Things just go a little crazy.
I think the healer balance is better than it was at the end of Legion, though.
Not necessarily Mythic Plus, but I think overall.
I mean like healer balance in terms of like not relative to one another, but like relative to the rest of the party. In Legion, they didn't have to heal very often.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And now they actually have to heal, which is a lot more engaging than just AFKing in cat form, waiting for consumption leech
to end. Yeah,
that was stupid. All right, so then that comes to the conclusion of scrapping Tyrannical and Fortified, which you said that you assume that developers don't want to do?
I don't think they want to do that. I think at the lower end, it creates a big enough change in the dungeon that, Fortified's going to be a little tougher this week. Like, next Tyrannical week's going to be great. Like, can't wait to do some keys there. We'll try for our weekly 15. Like,
sure.
So, I mean, after talking with you, I really do think it's just a timer issue.
Is it? I don't know. For
the most part, but
I really hate Tyrannical and Fortified. I feel like they're just like lazily designed to fixes that aren't super fun. Like they don't. Okay, think about all of the other fixes that we have. They interact with the dungeon in some meaningful way. Whether or not you believe it's too meaningful is up for debate. But Fortified and Tyrannical interact with the dungeon in some meaningful way. but there's counterplay to a lot of them. Tyrannical Fortified, there is very little counterplay. Let's be real.
Like, take a Tyrannical. Let's say it doesn't increase health or damage, but every single boss on Tyrannical spawns with an Awakened Obelisk.
Okay.
Is that a good idea of Tyrannical? No increased health, no increased damage, but each Tyrannical boss now spawns with an Awakened Obelisk.
I think that's more in line of where I would like to be. And then Fortified is Reaping. The Reaping equivalent, right?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
I think that would be
like,
would be like okay in terms of I don't know how you'd balance something like that, but that's more in line of something I would be that's at least those are interesting things, right?
Yeah, like, okay, you go into Volcall, you get Samrek. You have to do Volcall with Samrek or something. And, that's not too bad, because, his health is up, but you have time. And then you have Priestess Alunza, where you have a target, something else to hit because she kills herself. And, I think it could be actually... And that's more what I'm talking about, like, Tyrannical with additional things that impact the boss fight other than health and damage.
Yeah. For me though, I feel like 4 affix rows just is not that great. My camera just turned off, but it's okay. I don't think 4 affix rows are all that ideal, and the reason for that is like there's just so much variance in the dungeons. I think you just kind of need to move on with Tyrannical and Fortified. Like the seasonal fixes are sick, and I think that they should continue to make sure that they're reiterating on them. We've had 2 good seasonal fixes. We've had 2 pretty bad ones. But if they continue to reiterate on the seasonal fixes in a more positive light, I think that Tyrannical and Fortified can't afford to no longer be in the game.
Yeah, if they can just find a way that, like, when interacting with 1 week trash, 1 week bosses, there is a distinction and you feel the distinction. I think we can suggest that, hey, Tyrannical, it doesn't feel bad just doing flat health damage. Here's some alternate like things that you could think about. Like, even if trash, when they died, they what was I gonna say? They like drop a pool under them. Like, even on death affixes, just like that, if the trash stands in them, they gain the fortified effect. Something like that. I don't know, just a little more counterplay than just flat health damage. I think that's fine, but I don't think they can just flat out remove them, because there is a place for them, unfortunately.
Really, I don't know if I feel like there's just so many like different variable affixes that I don't know how there's a place for Tyrannical and Fortified.
Well, in some sense of 1 week bosses are the hard part, 1 week trash is a little harder. Like that distinction, I think, is fine. Not necessarily in the way they're doing it right
now. I don't know what the solution. I think the alternating weeks thing is a big dilemma. Maybe like they could change the level 4 row to be trash focused and the level 7 row to be boss focused in a different way.
I don't hate that idea either. I know, like,
but like you would have something that's trash focused and something that's boss focused every week, but it would be different.
Yeah, more cleanly organize the rows. I mean, that's fine.
I want to fix rework personally, but that's a completely different topic. That's a way different rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, just to conclude, I think it's like short term. The issue is the timer for Tyrannical. There are some other issues, but it can mostly be fixed by the timer. People have know these dungeons so well at this point that there's ways around the majority of the one-shots or whatever else. The meta's defined 2 classes that can avoid these one-shots for the most part. Long term, we'll have to see what Shadowlands brings, but if they take their more aggressive tuning too, that would definitely be appreciated, as they have been.
They've been doing an okay job across BFA.
Sure.
It was way better than what they did in Legion, rather. They have been trying to tune the dungeons even up until the 8.3 patch, where they continued to tune stuff, even though for sure they were already working on Shadowlands. So they have been working on the dungeons for a fairly long time. I think that reiterating on and like making sure that they take the problems that were ever present in BFA dungeons and make sure they're no longer in Shadowlands dungeons would be sick. All right. I think that probably concludes the video today. Thank you for coming, Squishei. Is there anything that you'd like to say?
How many Vic Goths on Tyrannical could we have killed during this?
35 minutes. Tyrannical Vic Goth, like, if you do like the best strat, you get a 6-minute boss. If you do the worst strat, it's like 8 to 9 minutes. So a couple. We could have killed a couple Vigoths. We could have had a weekly no lever at best.
Or we could have died to the insane dot and,
Yeah. All right. That's going to conclude that today. I will see you guys later. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I will see you next time. Later.